Data is everywhere. It's becoming the invisible hand that shapes how we experience the world. And whether we're talking about big data, and it's estimated that 90% of the world's data was created in the last 2 years, or small data, it's easy to forget that data is ultimately personal. Data is not an abstraction. It represents human beings and their behaviors. It captures our fears and our aspirations. And what's exciting is that now that the data revolution, the information revolution, is finally reaching the poorer parts of the developing world, we have the power to take this personal data and use it to supercharge our capacity to solve some of the world's toughest problems. So we've been working on this with something we've been calling lean data at Acumen. Last year I told you a little bit about this. It really was the tip of the iceberg. So in 2014, we started piloting these lean data projects. We did 6 of these projects to test to see if it would really work. In particular, we started capturing data on the poverty levels of Acumen's customers. We found that this approach was really working, and this year we're going broader and deeper. So we've not only conducted 12 of these projects, we have more of them underway, but we're looking not at just the poverty levels of our customers, but the depth of impact that our companies are having. And because we've had such success, my hope is that not only next year will we roll this out across our entire portfolio, but I think we may have something here that has the power to shift the entire impact investing sector. But before getting into that, I'll take a step back for a little bit of context. I've heard some of these statistics earlier today. 65% of the population in sub-Saharan Africa alone has a mobile phone today. That number will go to 100% by 2020. As exciting, there'll be 2.5 billion additional smartphones in the developing world also by 2020, from 1.5 to 4 billion smartphones. So in 5 years' time, not only will nearly every single one of the customers Acumen aims to serve have a cell phone, but a significant number of them will have smartphones as well. So what does this mean? Well, taking a step towards Silicon Valley for a moment, about a month ago, a company called Premise raised a $50 million Series C round from the likes of Andreessen Horowitz and Google Ventures. So Premise's model is to pay 25,000 users in the developing world who own Android phones to collect economic data, because they believe that this data will be more accurate and more real-time than the government statistics that they can collect. So I see this as some of the most forward-thinking investors in the world have recognized that cell phones in the hands of tens and hundreds of millions of new people represent a treasure trove of potentially new information that we can tap into, not only to create value for economic markets, but to create value for them directly. So this is the opportunity we see in lean data. We've called it lean data in deference to the lean startup principles, ideas of being fast, of being iterative, of talking directly to customers and using that to shift how you do your work. Now, talking directly to end customers may not in and of itself sound revolutionary, but the point of reference for this work is traditional development, monitoring, and evaluation. And just to put a marker in what that looks like, earlier this week, I got an email that one of our companies is undergoing a formal evaluation of their work. And so the researchers were proud to report that they had just completed the baseline survey. They had talked to 3,000 or more than 3,000 customers, conducting between 1 and 2 hour surveys with each of them. That's the baseline, right? So take an hour or two, add in a little travel time, more than 3,000 customers. That's about 10,000 hours worth of work to get the baseline numbers. But 10,000 hours, that's one person working full-time for 5 years, right? And let's repeat that next year to get the next level data, the year after that. You can imagine that if you're a social entrepreneur and you've had the chance to hear from a lot of social entrepreneurs today, I'm pretty sure all of them would say, no thank you. I have real work to do here. This isn't for me. So that's the paradigm that we're trying to change. So the idea and the principles of lean data, first and foremost, how do you put the customer first? How do you collect data that's create value for them? And we do it using low-cost technologies, again, primarily using cell phones. We collect data from SMS as well as voice calls, talking to customers directly. We want to create these fast feedback loops, and the most important thing is we only collect data that we're going to use to make decisions. Again, these are the principles that we're aspiring to. So how is it working? Well, in the last year alone, we've done 12 of these projects. The typical project costs about $5,000, excuse me. It takes about 4 weeks to complete. Now, I want to underline that $5,000 number. It's not $50,000, $500,000, or even $5 million that you'd sometimes spend on a typical evaluation effort. And at this very low cost and in this quick speed, what is the data we're getting back? So this is actual data on poverty focus from 12 of Acumen's companies. So one thing I want to share about this, it's customers living on less than $2.50 a day. As context, many of our peers have been talking about serving low and middle income customers. They're typically talking about customers in the kind of $4 to $10 range. So Acumen's bar at this 250 range is really looking at the base of that economic pyramid. And again, when you get this real data back, you can start to see differences and patterns. So in our agriculture portfolio, there's the highest concentration of low-income customers, which isn't surprising. Across energy and education, slightly lower, more around that 50% bar. Again, this is the first time we're getting this data back, so we don't know how those numbers move, but it may be that there are more mixed income models that are needed to actually make these businesses work. And then you look at health, and you see these two numbers that are very, very different. So one of them is from Zikitsa, our ambulance company in India, which has a public-private model where the end customers are not paying for the service. So not surprisingly, that's a model where you can reach large numbers of the poor. The other is a private clinic located in a major city. So right now, with that purely private model, they are not yet getting the penetration in low-income populations that they might get someday. Now, the point isn't that one of those numbers is right and one of them is wrong. The point is, we actually need this data to figure out where these business models do and don't work, where a purely market-based approach will work, where you need philanthropy and other kind of capital. And if we can start getting this data back on a regular basis, we're going to be a lot smarter about the decisions that we'll make. Second, it's not just important who we're serving, but of course, if we're improving their lives. Peter has been one of the many entrepreneurs who's been willing to take a leap with us. And what we found with Burn is, in fact, we did surveys that confirmed that there's about a 56% savings in charcoal expenditure from someone who buys a Burn stove. We have lots of examples of lots of charts that look like this. And as we see those numbers, we can again get smarter about where our entrepreneurs are having an impact. I'll give a little more detail on the experience of Willem Nolens, the CEO of SolarNow. SolarNow is a solar home system company in Uganda. And Peter's question was whether or not these systems are affordable to the customers he's trying to reach. So his systems are about 50 watts. They cost about $340. And his concern was, at that price point, who was he reaching? And in particular, there had been a subsidy that the World Bank had pulled away of about $250 per system. In response to that, Peter put in a financing scheme that extended credit out 18 months. And he wanted to understand if that was working in terms of addressing some of the affordability questions. So we conducted lean data surveys, and what did we find? The data was very encouraging. 49% of customers, again, for these larger, more robust systems, under $2.50 a day, they essentially stop using kerosene, and they have light, they're using about 2.5 hours of additional light every day. So that was all very positive. One other thing we did in this survey, I personally had been a big fan of very closed-ended surveys, yes, no, strongly agree, strongly disagree, 1, 2, 3, because we felt like that's the best way to get kind of the cleanest data. But we've been talking to some of our partners who had said that we should experiment with open-ended questions. So in this one, we added just one question on the end that simply said, is there anything else you'd like to tell us? And just from that question, a third of the customers came back and said, I've got a problem with the system. Maybe it's a quality problem, maybe it's an after-sales service problem. We didn't expect it. And if you read actually the responses, it's really amazing how much people are willing to share and how vocal they were. And Willem, of course, to his credit, takes this data and says, wow, I actually am getting better data just by calling up customers on the phone than I'm getting from my frontline salespeople and frontline support people. So he responded immediately to this. They put 9 people on customer support and after-sales support. They're directly addressing the problem. And as a validation of the value of this work, they're now going to be conducting the same kinds of surveys quarterly to make sure they're having this ongoing dialogue with their customers. This starts to shine a little bit of a light on the importance of us asking the right questions. So the starting point, of course, people have a cell phone in their pocket, and that's very, very powerful. But if you can't find a way to ask the right questions, you're just going to be getting data back rather than real information that's going to bring you insights. One of the questions that we aspire to answer one day is how do we compare impact across various kinds of interventions in our portfolio? Healthcare versus energy versus education. This is a very, very challenging question. So what we've been doing is, as we're going into the depth on each of those verticals, right? So how much are you saving because of your solar home system? What is the value of the improved sanitation? We're also asking questions that cut across. In particular, we've been developing our own questions around what we're calling meaningfulness. So saying to customers, we want to understand from you what are the most important changes, and we want to understand from you what you value the most. And you can see how if we can cut across and ask, how they value the meaningfulness of various products and correlate that with the depth of impact that we're seeing across the different verticals, it may be that we can really begin to compare in new ways. So what does this look like in practice? So this is the question we've developed. There have been changes in my life because of product service that looks really simple. It's our 4th iteration of that question. We're going to keep on working on it, but it seems to be working. And you can see it's working because of the differences between solar and private health clinic. Strongly agree for solar is at 57% versus the 38% for private health clinic, kind of neutral disagree at 8% and 22%. So you imagine, again, if you can start to see this level of differentiation, might this question allow us to kind of crack open that door and begin to compare across? Again, very, very early, but we think it has potential. And finally, as much as we believe in the power of these phones to talk directly to people, there are real limits. And so we've been experimenting with using sensors to collect data directly. So one example of this is with Guardian. It's a microfinance company that we've invested in India, but they're providing loans for consumers to build toilets. Now you can imagine if you call up someone on their phone and ask them about their toilet usage, you might not get the best data, right? But this is a really important question, because in fact what Guardian's concerned about is that what you go and you see is that people are not actually necessarily using the toilets that they've built. Only one member of the household is using this. Now, in a country like India, where the government has been building toilets nationally, where more than 500 million people are still practicing open defecation, figuring out what it takes to get a customer and a whole family to actually use an improved toilet all the time is a really important question. So if we can use these sensors to start to get that insight of who are those outliers who change their behavior, what is it about the toilet and what is it about them and what they've been told about the toilet, that's not just valuable to Guardian, but you can imagine sharing that data more broadly and it affecting what's going on across India or even more broadly. So I have to give a big shout out to, Gayatri is here, Peter is here, but we can give examples from lots and lots of our companies, entrepreneurs who've been willing to take a leap with us. It's really their willingness to work with us, their willingness to partner with us, to try to talk to their customers and learn together that has made this all possible. And again, to me, the validation that we're onto something is when they take it forward, where we can help get them to a place or partner with them, we're always learning with them, and then they bring it forward. And I think this is really where we start to see the shift. So if I pull back again to what's been going on and maybe what's been wrong so far about how we've been thinking about impact. The locus of accountability has often been to this top-down thing where the donor or the funder is saying to the investor, I want to measure these things to make sure you are doing what you said you would do. And it's that desire for accountability that's kind of driving the whole conversation. And one of the shifts we're trying to make is to say, if we can situate this at the level of providing value for the customer and providing value for the company, if that value is going to get created, of course the data will then easily flow up the chain, but that's where we have to situate ourselves first. And I think we can do that. So for the last month or so, I've been going to some conferences in our sector and talking about the work we've been doing here. And it's been interesting to see the response. Because on the one hand, there's a lot of enthusiasm. When I in particular talk to people who have been in the space for a long time, I hear things like, impact measurement is potentially the Achilles heel of impact investing, and maybe this is a way forward. But on the other hand, there's it's support, but it's sort of a passive support. It's sort of a good for you, keep at it, rather than a I'm here with you. And I think that is the hope that I have is that we can make that change and to bring people along. The prevailing wisdom, which again is built for a lot of good reasons. It's built because we haven't been doing this the right way up until now. It's going to be hard, it's going to be slow, it's going to be all of those things, and am I really going to learn anything anyway? But I think that is the prevailing wisdom that we can change. And I think we need inspiration potentially from the outside. There are lots and lots of sectors that have taken, complex, qualitative, kind of hard to boil down data, put it into ways that we can understand, that creates transparency, that creates accountability and drives action. Others have solved this problem, and I see this as both a challenge and an opportunity for us that we can do it as well. When I think about where we are now, Acumen was and has been one of the founders of this space, and I wonder what our lasting legacy can be. I think this work we're doing in lean data has a chance to make a real mark. And when I imagine the future, I believe it would be possible and powerful, say a year from now, if 20 of the top impact investors were collecting data on the customers they're serving, on poverty levels. Imagine what we'd begin to learn, again, not just from Acumen, but from others. Where are markets working, where are they not, and how, in fact, are we changing people's lives? I believe that we can shift the conversation around impact and recognize that first and foremost, if we're collecting data, it has to be about creating customer value. So we should not be collecting data so we can pull it out and a year from now put it in a report that frankly makes us look nice. We need to collect data so that we can improve products for the customers that are consuming those products today. And finally, I think we have the chance to look around and to recognize that this technology revolution means that our capacity to listen to voices that have previously been unheard can be scaled up massively if we choose to ask the right questions and we choose to listen. So I think that this is the mark that we can make. I think it's going to be an important part of our legacy. I'm excited about where it's going, and I think we have a bright future ahead. So thank you.